So I know by now we've all pretty much had our fill of Helix 3.15 videos. I kind of missed the mark. Last week was just an insane one. I had this symphony gig I was really stressing about. My wife ended up getting food poisoning, and then a few days ago I had this tree fall and almost hit my house. Luckily it missed the car, it missed the house, but it did take out the power line. So that's kind of still laying in the front yard. We're going to get that cleaned up in a little bit. But in this video, instead of focusing on specifically on the new features or new models, I'm going to just build a preset from the ground up like I'd been requested to do for the last few months by a certain commenter. I'm just going to kind of talk about my theory here on dialing in the amp tone. That's going to be a big part of the video. And then also the effects chain, the order of all the effects that we're adding. I can't use all of the new blocks because it'd be a way too big preset for the HX Stomp's DSP capacity, and also the video would just be way too long. So I'm going to use some stuff that I use, and by the end of it, hopefully we have a relatively well dialed in preset. I'm using a JBL Tower here, which is taking the place of an FR speaker. I've measured it. It's at about 85 decibels. Going to be loud enough that hopefully I get a good idea here of what it's actually sounding like at performance volume. The thing I should note is that obviously this video is missing the presets I'm showing here on the screen. It's not up to my normal standard of I like to use it with a band before I share it online. So the one thing I've noticed consistently when I build a preset at home, even if I have it dialed in well and it sounds good, is that the volume differences between the clean, the overdriven, and the lead tones are usually not quite dialed in. And so the easiest way to do that is just to set aside a volume parameter that you're not assigning any effects chaining to, something that's always on, something that you can change with snapshots if you're doing that, or that you can change with Footswitch controls, Footswitch parameter controls. And you want to be able to access that either during the rehearsal or if there's no rehearsal during the gig in between songs. So that's the one thing I'm consistently finding issues with in my own preset building, is that the clean tone and the overdriven tones don't match up. We kind of subjectively hear the overdriven tone as being louder than it actually is compared to the clean tone. So anyway, let's get started. I found the new Line 6 custom amp that they put in here. I'm going to start with the drive a little bit lower. I want to dial in a clean sound, and then we'll get the overdriven sound a bit later. So right off the bat, I had been reading, and this amp, they're suggesting to keep the master volume at full, as with most of the amp models they suggest. So I'm going to stick to that for now. We can get real in depth with it later at a different video maybe. And I'm going to turn these three down like I normally do, about that far. So I've turned down the drive. We do not have traditional treble and bass controls. The high pass filter is essentially functioning as our bass control. So with the high pass off, we're getting the most low end full sound. And as we turn it up, this is going to be a way to tighten up the low end, especially if you're running a lot of overdrive. I think I still want to clean up the sound a little bit. So once I get kind of it dialed in here, I'm kind of happy with these sounds, with these settings. Then I start going in more depth and playing with the sag control. I usually don't mess with the hum or the ripple too much. Let's see what the hum sounds like on this amp. So the hum can be really influential in deciding kind of the quality of overdrive that you're getting. It changes depending on how high this parameter is. Obviously, that's the point of having a parameter. So the downside is if you turn it up too high, you can actually hear the hum. The goal of mine, if I want to use this parameter anyway, is to keep it as high as possible without actually being able to notice that it's there. So that's about as high as I would go, I think. Maybe I'll go to 8 just to be safe. Now listen and let me know in the comments if you can hear a difference. I'm going to turn the hum off and then turn it back up to 8. I think I actually don't like the way that that's influencing the sound, but this is a parameter you might want to consider assigning to a Footswitch once we get into dialing in a more high gain tone with this amp model. The ripple parameter is something that I treat in a similar way, so obviously you can hear that the further you turn it up. There's about the point where I can't actually notice it, but it's still going to have a little bit of an effect on the sound. All right, this one I can already tell I actually do like how it's affecting the sound. And then lastly, I'll move on to the bias and the bias X. Again, I'm not trying to really explain the technical side of things too much in this video because I'll get something wrong. Someone's going to correct me. I just want to focus on what we're actually hearing here. So as you turn up the bias, it seems like we're getting a lot more distortion. What I actually think we're hearing is more of the upper end harmonics that make it seem a little bit more present. For our cleaner sound, I think I'm actually going to err on keeping this lower, though I really do like how it sounds when I set it higher. And then finally bias X. Okay, I feel like I can feel a little bit of compression that this is adding to some degree. So for the clean sound, I'm tending to like this a little bit higher than normal. Something you got to keep in mind as you dial in a clean sound is generally this presence control you want to keep down. So although you can say the high pass filter and the presence are acting in place of the bass and the treble controls, that's not quite exactly what's happening. The bass and treble controls on an amp are typically actual EQ adjustments. The presence, and again, I don't want to get too technical. Someone please correct me if I'm a little bit off here. The presence control on an amp, if you ever played through like a Blues Deluxe, it's a pretty common amp that has one. That actually exists in the power amp section. So this has to do with how much high end the amp is feeding back into the feedback loop as the power amp puts out more. So at higher distortion levels, you probably want to blend a little bit of this in so it gets a little bit more bright and stays clean and clear, and you can understand what notes you're playing and stuff. On cleaner sounds, it can tend to get really ice picky if you have that presence control really high. So for a clean sound, I'm going to edge on a lower setting there. The depth control I'm hearing just adds a ton of low end. Maybe if you have an extended range guitar, that's something you want to go for. If you have a really overdriven sound, you're going to want to shy away from having too much bass, right? That's what I'm trying to say. All right, so that's our clean sound. Let's go with that. I don't want to mess with the cab controls too much because we've already kind of dialed it in. Something I pretty much always do is turn up the early reflections just a little bit. Kind of gives the simulation like you're hearing the amp in a room rather than right next to your eardrum. Especially if you're using headphones, this is going to help make it sound more realistic. So when I'm practicing on headphones, I'll usually turn up the early reflections. However, when I go to perform, I'll keep it down here. Yeah, I might turn up the low cut a little bit. Let's go with that. All right, so I'm going to save this preset. Let's just call it Ventoux, whatever you call it. And EGH is my way of specifying that this is a preset I've built with an electric guitar with humbuckers. Ideally, I would have a preset exactly like this once I'm done with it, and I'm going to tune it specifically for use with a Strat or a Telecaster or something. I like to keep different presets depending on which guitar I'm using. One of the new features I wanted to mention really quick here that they've added is the guitar pad. So this is now assignable per preset. That's a huge deal for people that have active guitars and passive guitars. I pretty much exclusively play passive instruments, so not a big deal for me. But if you're someone who's using a bunch of different instruments with your Helix product, you can now control the input pad per preset. So that's really nice. All right, so we've got this. Now I'm going to dial in a more overdriven sound. I'm actually going to copy this and paste it again. And now I'm going to change these settings, try and get an overdriven sound that sounds decent, and then I'll show you how I'm going to transfer it actually into one block here. So I'm pretty happy with that sound. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but as you turn up the drive, I tend to like a little bit more presence, a little bit more of the high-pass filter. So in other words, a stronger cut in the low end so it doesn't get muddy. And then I boosted the mids as well a little. I also brought up the depth control to combat the high-pass filter. One of the things I would do on pretty much any of the other amp blocks when I was going for a more overdriven sound and I wanted a really warm sound but not too much low end is I would crank the bass control and then in the cab block actually turn up rather the low cut so that it's not really like overly muddy. And you saw it was messing a little bit here with the sag controls. I brought it down. I wanted in general just a little bit of a tighter sound. The hum and the ripple, I don't mind that on the more overdriven sound. That seems to be adding something that I like. I've got a low fret, if you heard that. It's really sharp, isn't it? That's where it should be. That's that 4th fret there, G string. I've got a low fret. I need to get this guitar crowned. So these settings, I'm liking the sound of. Let's transfer them over to the initial amp block. So just going to save it real quick in case I screw up. I tend to like my overdrive assignments, like something that changes how much overdrive I'm dealing with. I tend to assign that to Footswitch 2 on all of my presets. So what we're going to do here is just keep a mental note of the drive parameters. We have 2.5 and then 5.5. And I'm going to assign the drive parameter to Footswitch 2, 2.5, and 5.5. I also like manually giving it a red color and renaming it drive so it doesn't get overwritten as we go and add other effect parameters here. So that's the drive. We're going to repeat this with pretty much all of these parameters. Maximum you can do is 8, so hopefully I didn't use more than 8. If not, I'll probably end up cutting back on some of these settings down lower here. All right, see you in a second. All right, so I got that figured out. As I press Footswitch 2, you're going to see all these change. So there's my two sounds. We have a little bit of a volume difference here. So this is where it's going to become important. I didn't have enough to do ripple, hum, and bias X. However, I didn't think those were important as these other ones. I have 7 parameters dialed up here right now. You're going to notice actually for some of them, the maximum control is actually less than the minimum. And the reason you would want to do that, so the minimum settings essentially is all of our controls from our clean tone, copied and pasted. And then the maximum setting is all of the controls for our overdriven sound. So in a situation where I had actually misspoke earlier, I actually ended up cutting the mids for a more overdriven sound. That's why you would see the maximum parameter lower than the minimum parameter. So minimum, again, is the clean sound. Check out the mid control here. I'm pointing with my finger like you can see it. Check out the mid control, and then when I press it, most stuff is going to go up, the mid control is going to come down, and this is our overdriven sound. So that is just a quick way, maybe not so quick, to save yourself an overdrive block. I like using the amp parameters more often than using an actual overdrive. The distortion blocks that I do use a lot, probably the Diana drive, which is like a Zen drive, I believe. And then we also have the compulsive drive, like an OCD. And then lastly, the treble booster. The Klon is also a great one, the Minotaur. Deranged Master is the treble booster. So those are the 4 that I probably use most often. The Timmy clone is also pretty good. So, all right, we got the amp block dialed in. I'm realizing this is probably going to be a half-hour video. Let's try the new Ampeg Octo Comp. The one thing I just wish we could get on the HX Stomp, and I know I'm complaining already, maybe for a future update, I would love to see a gain reduction meter like we have on some of the larger Helix units. With the HX Stomp and HX Effects, I believe, too, does not have a gain reduction meter. You just kind of have to trust your ear. So the Ampeg Octo Comp should be pretty easy to dial in here. I'm assuming it has preset ratio and attack controls that are kind of just set up for the sound of this effect. So the way I think I'm gonna use the compressor in this effect is just as a way to add sustain. I'm not trying to affect the quality of sound or limit the dynamic range as much for like rhythm parts. I'm gonna use it and kind of reserve it for when I'm taking a solo. This is how I'm gonna get my sustain out of an overdriven sound. So I'm gonna switch to the more overdriven sound that I've come up with, and I'll dial in the compressor then, just based on what I'm looking for lead tone. And if you're finding you found the tone that you like, but it's a little bit too compressed, you can actually hear the front of the note being clamped down on. I'm not having too much of an issue there, but if you are finding that, a great fix for that is the mix control. This is just a blend between the dry and the wet signal. If I had to guess on this effect, the attack is set relatively slow, so this is going to be a great block for getting the sustain of a lead guitar solo that you're looking for. Yeah, so that'll do for that. I also want to be able to control this with a foot switch. I typically put effects dealing with dynamics. If I have Footswitch 2 taken already, I'll put it on Footswitch 1. So there it is. And I'm just going to give it a short name because on the HX Stomp we don't have that much room. And I'll manually change it to yellow in case I assign a parameter change to it later. So there is our dry tone, basically. I'm pretty happy with that. So we have a clean tone here. We have a compressed tone. I actually might lower the level a little bit. So we have a clean tone, a clean compressed tone, and then we have an overdriven tone, and an overdriven tone with some compression in front, kind of pushing it into lead guitar territory. So, 4 different tones already, and we've only used 2 foot switches. There's a really great new feature from 3.15 I'll talk about for a second. I got to give credit to Steve Starlacci, who has a fantastic channel. He called it preset, or rather snapshot stacking, or snapshot, something like that. Essentially, you go into Command Center, and you can assign one specific button to scroll between snapshots. I have a few ideas on how I want to use this with my units, just the way I work as a player. So I'll do a video on that later. But yeah, this would be a great way to access all these different sounds if you wanted to use snapshots, but still just only have, one foot switch dedicated to that. So anyway, I have dry sounds, like I said, assigned to foot switches 1 and 2. You can have none bypassed for the clean sound. Press just foot switch 1 for the compressor now. Get rid of that. Press foot switch 2 for the overdriven sound, and then press 1 and 2 together. That's your lead tone. So there's no actual solo boost to it right now, but I can show you how to do that later. Let's add in a delay here. They added a bunch of new delay models. The one I'm going to focus on in this video is the Heliosphere, probably the more simple one. And for a solo tone, I usually like to go around 450 milliseconds, something like that. 500 or all the way down to 300 is still kind of acceptable for a lead tone. So this one is unique because it actually has reverb in the feedback loop. You're not going to hear it on the initial attack of your note. However, I'm going to delay this a little bit longer. That first repeat, when it actually comes back to you, can have reverb on it. And you can control the level of the reverb. The decay is very long right now. I'm going to lower the mix as well. Wait for that to stop. Interesting. Okay, so this feedback's set pretty high. I think with this one, with reverb in the feedback loop, I'm going to probably edge on having the feedback set a little bit low so it doesn't get too muddy, at least for my use here, since I'm going to use this as a lead guitar delay sound. Let's go back down here to around 450. I'm keeping the mix up just so I can hear what's actually happening. That was my doorbell growing up, that little melody. Interesting. So I had turned down the headroom here. That started distorting a lot sooner than I thought it would. And it's kind of a gritty, nasty distortion because I think maybe because you hear the reverb. On some models, I do like to mess with the headroom. I don't think so for this one, so I'm going to keep that at unity. In fact, you might actually want to boost it just to make sure you're always getting a clean sound here. So in these two blocks, if we ever decide to add a volume boost, it could clip this even if you had headroom set at unity. So I'm going to boost that to maximum just to make sure it's never going to clip, because I really don't like that sound for this use. I definitely do like modulation on delay for lead guitar stuff. It helps it step out and get out of the way of the actual notes that you're playing in real time. Still adds a nice space behind it. That's probably a little bit too much. So there's a pleasing setting. And then once I've dialed in the delay sound, I'm just going to lower the mix. Probably around 20% is going to make me happy. I think I'm actually going to raise this a little bit. So here's another thing that might change once you get in front of a real band, is the mix control here. So leave this open. You might want to change this. This is something that's kind of hard to gauge without a full band behind you. I find that when I'm sitting at home, I dial in a nice amount, and then when I get to the stage, I can't actually hear the delay enough, and so I end up boosting it a little bit. I'm going to leave it at 20%. No, I'm going to take my own advice and actually boost it. So when you dial in at home, give yourself a little bit more wet effects than you think you need. Yeah. So there's my suggestion for that. And with wet effects, I like to put it on Footswitch 3, 4, 5. I'm going to go with 3 because this is going to be kind of an essential part of the sound. 4 and 5 are going to be, effects that aren't really necessary to the core sound. I'm just going to name this delay and assign it green again. Now, here's something. If you think you're going to use this delay only for solos, this is where you can actually put in your boost, right? So when you turn it on, if you had boosted the level at all, now you're getting a solo boost. Make sure that wasn't clipping here. However, if you think you might end up using it for like rhythm parts, just to make something sound a little bit more full, maybe edge on a little bit less mix, and then keep the level at unity here. I'm going to keep it unity because I actually use my HX Stomp with a preamp combo direct box with an effects loop. So that does a few things. It gives me a boost. It has the effects loop in it. It makes it so I can use higher impedance pickups like a piezo on an acoustic with it, warms up the sound a little bit, and then it also balances the signal. So I actually don't need a boost on my unit specifically, but there's just a tip there if you think that's something you might need. Modulation. Let's get into the new Ampeg Liquifier. This is kind of reminding me of the Arion chorus. Kind of has that slightly boxy sound to it. This is my first time playing most of these effect models, by the way, so. I was reading about this one, and essentially you can use it as a more typical sounding chorus or dual chorus. So this is actually, I believe they're acting in series, so one after another, versus running in parallel where they're unaffected and then blended back down. I believe this one is actually in series. Let me double check that real quick. Okay, so they don't tell you. Maybe someone here can chime in if they know a little bit more about it. So the liquifier is actually 2 choruses in one, hence the dual effect. If you prefer it to behave more like a traditional chorus pedal, choose single. In single mode, it's going to sound a little bit more like a traditional chorus because it only has one line of modulation going. If I had to guess, I'm going to say they're in series. Here's a quick tip as well. If you don't really dig the chorus sound, you're more of a vibrato user, all of the chorus blocks can be used as vibrato. The effect is actually the same. It's the same effect. The difference between chorus and vibrato is that chorus has dry sound blended in. So there's our 100% vibrato signal. I think I'm going to end up using a single here, and I might go somewhere in between chorus and vibrato for this sound. That's a nice sound. Something I should mention here is that I've purposely put this after the delay because I love modulated delay. This is a way, I did dial in a little bit of modulation there. It's not really noticeable, but putting the modulation after the delay is just a way to get a little bit more for your money. And I'm going to increase that to maximum just as I did before. And then finally assign this to a Footswitch. Let's do Footswitch 4, and I'm just going to call it vibrato. I have, you can see here, 80 presets on this device, and I have the original Stomp, which is on my pedal board just down below, which is entirely full. So sometimes the reason that I'll do this is just, I use a ton of different presets. I'm not really someone that has like 3 or 4 presets that I use and that's it. I love designing stuff. I'm always creating new stuff, and so a simple way for me to remember what each Footswitch is doing is just calling it the most simple thing, right? If it had said Ampeg Liquifier, like earlier, I might not remember if I'd said it for a chorus sound or vibrato sound. So just by writing vibrato, that's just my way of giving myself a hint later. And then finally, let's do a reverb here. I'm going to choose the plate. I've been waiting for a good plate verb in the Helix since I've had it, really. And so this is exciting for me. Right off the bat, I'm going to boost the decay because I'm looking for more of a washy sound. I'll share with you the settings as we go here, obviously. Generally, a lot of the settings that these blocks come with are set up to suit 90% of players, what 90% of people are looking for with a reverb sound or a delay sound. And I really appreciate that. However, I want to dial in a little bit more. So when I dial in a reverb, I like to do that, boost the mix so you can actually hear the reverb, what it's doing. I'm going to boost the decay, I think maybe around 6 might be. Alright, so this is directly affecting the high end. A lot of these controls are the same that we have on the dynamic hall that we got around a year ago now. I do have a full video on dialing in all of these specific settings, what they mean, and how they actually apply to guitar tone. If you want to check that out, I'll try and remember to link it up here. I'm just going to share with you the sounds so that this video doesn't go on for another 30 minutes, the sounds that I'm generally trying to go for. Here's another quick tip. As you're dialing in a reverb sound, if you're going for a more wet sound, there's a few things you can do to make sure that you're getting the amount of reverb that you want, but it's not cluttering the mix. Obviously, the mix control is self-explanatory. The pre-delay can be very helpful here. The more you boost that, the more in our minds it's going to separate the reverb sound from the dry tone of the guitar. With the mix set so high, it might not be so apparent, but let's bring the mix down to a still relatively high level, and we're going to test the difference between no pre-delay versus around 25 milliseconds. Now watch as I raise the pre-delay, how things change. So the pre-delay just kind of lets the attack of the original note shine through before the reverb starts swelling in behind it. That's exactly what a pre-delay is. And that can be useful for keeping the sound still pretty clear, but very washy. And of course, the low cuts. So the high cuts and the low cuts. The more low cut you dial in, obviously the less low end there's going to be, and the more your guitar can shine through and not be cluttered with really low end reverb. Sometimes I'll go as high as like 300. On the guitar, we have fundamental notes running all the way through like 500 hertz towards the higher end. But rolling it at around 300, that's enough. So you're still getting a very full sounding bodied reverb, but it's not actually conflicting with the fundamental frequencies of the low to mid range of your guitar. The high cut, I tend to like things more open, though a plate reverb is generally darker sounding, and so 10K is a reasonable setting for that. You can hear a bit of a difference there. Something I've noticed, I was watching a tip video, I forget who posted it, but they were saying that they preferred the sound of a low and high cut in an EQ block rather than the low and the high cut in the amp. And here's what's happening. So although, everyone says a guitar amp doesn't output anything higher than like 7 or 8K ever, the truth is it's severely rolled off, but there's still some information there. These high and low cuts in the EQ block is much more dramatic. Maybe experiment with this if you want a way to really clear the low and the high end much more extremely than the cab block can. But the fact is, there is plenty of information happening up there above 8K with a guitar sound. Whether you disagree with that or not, that's the correct thing. And so that's why you can actually hear in the reverb. You can hear a difference between 8K or 12K, 16K, etc. And so that kind of wraps up everything. I'm going to assign that to a Footswitch so I can access it later. I'm going to tune this preset a little bit, and then maybe in a few weeks you'll see it in my preset library. Of course, you can download the, or not download, but steal the settings from the screen rather if you want to grab it right away. If not, if you're someone that had gotten my preset library in the past, I'll leave a link here for new users. This is going to be thrown in there as a free update, just like everything is. We're closing in on 100 presets soon. This is something I've been working on for the entire last 3 years that I've had the Helix. Every time I build a preset, I tune it with a band. Of course, I make it here at home on the PA speakers. I check the stereo image on my monitors, and then I'll actually bring it in and use it with a band through a professional level front of house system. I'll tune it a few times based on my experience using that, and then I'll finally put the preset in the library. So everything that's in there has been tuned to my use, and it sounds good with a live band. Of course, I have different guitars and a different playing style than you might have, so take the preset, make some adjustments. This one still has some way to go before it's good enough that I want to put it in that package. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, maybe consider subscribing to the channel. I do a ton of Helix walkthroughs. This was a very long video, but in general, I try to keep my stuff much shorter. I know everyone has busy schedules, and anyway, that's all I have for you. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.